All right, you guys, so as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out, you guys. I got another short story for you guys. This one right here is a banger. I'm going to keep it short. There's a lot of moving parts to this story, but I'm going to be as detailed as I can. A lot of you have probably already heard about this story. It's somewhat of a high profile story, but I'm going to run it for you guys anyway. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. So this short story is about a crew of Mexican mafia enforcers who surreptitiously worked together with several other people, luring one of their targets, Richard Vaeda, who also went by the moniker of Pedro, to a discreet location in Orange before he was executed. So the three individuals who ended up going to trial on this case were Kevin Trejo, who also went by Minor, James Mendez, also known as Buck, and Mike Escobar, who also went by Risky. So for a lot of you that stay in the know and stay updated with a lot of the Mexican mafia cases that come out in the media, I'm sure a lot of you probably already know that Risky has turned state evidence and that he's cooperated in several other cases since he caught this case. You know, I'm not sure where he's at today or how much time he ended up with, but at one point, Risky had some status within the LA County Jail, and he was either running it single-handedly or he was part of the leadership. You know, for the purpose of keeping this story short, I'm not going to get into all the details of the indictment and everybody that was involved, but this trial that I'm highlighting in this story was actually part of a bigger indictment out of Orange County that was called Operation Nite Owl. And the main target in that investigation was an individual by the name of Johnny Martinez, Crow from Placentia, who was accused of allegedly ordering and orchestrating the demise of the victim in this story, who again went by the moniker Pedro. So Pedro was actually one of two homicide victims in this case, along with 6 other attempted homicides that were also named in the same indictment. So this story starts out sometime on or around August 20th of 2017. And at the time, Crow was supposedly overseeing a Mexican mafia street crew that was operating out of Orange County. He had a crew of hungry street enforcers who were more than willing to carry out his directives and prove themselves as being loyal Mexican mafia believers. Some of them were striving to become Mexican mafia members someday themselves, while others were just trying to increase their status and position as loyal street enforcers. Risky, Minor, and Buck were just 3 among a handful of others that this included. So at the time, they had designated areas of Orange County sewed up, meaning they had other street dealers and most, if not all, the street gangs in Orange County in line with the Mexican Mafia's taxation program. So a lot of the time, these enforcers would just drive around from location to location collecting tax money. That's what they did. They also had a number of legitimate street businesses that they were allegedly extorting as well. So one was actually a tire shop owner who was caught dealing on the slunders. You guys gotta understand, these guys that worked at these legitimate businesses, they weren't gang members, but a lot of them were street people that were well aware of the fact that they needed to get the permission of the Mexican Mafia first before they started selling product out of their shop. But instead, they tried to do it underhandedly without getting the blessings of the street crew who they knew represented the Mexican Mafia. And this created problems. But it took several confrontations with these guys before they folded and finally agreed to start paying their taxes. So other business ventures that they had lined up included running protection rackets for legal marijuana dispensaries. They would provide security and protection for these businesses, and in return, they would get paid for it. And you gotta understand, this protection, it extends to the streets. And what I mean by that is this: these street crews that operate out there on the streets, they have their own way of putting it out there on the streets that certain businesses, like these marijuana dispensaries, fall under their protection, under their control, which then prevents anyone from targeting these businesses from things like robberies, extortion, or other crimes of opportunity. You know, whenever you have an area like this established under a criminal organization like the Mexican Mafia, you're always gonna have people that are gonna make contributions because they wanna help, they wanna see you grow. Then you're also gonna have what are called your kickbacks, a set percentage that other dealers are gonna pay you to operate in your area. And then you have all the street gangs in that area that are all required to meet their monthly quotas. Another set amount that's either referred to as commission or another term that they prefer to use to pretty it up, making an honorable contribution. So with respects to Pedro, apparently he was freelancing out there in Orange County, working for himself. He was out there moving his own product. But because he was operating in an area of Orange County that this street crew considered to be their territory, he was required to send a cutback or a set percentage of his proceeds back to Crow. And apparently that's what he started doing. He's out there, he's moving his product, and when these enforcers come by every month to collect their cut, he pays them what he owes them. So let's just say it's 3 or 4 months later. At one point, Crow's enforcers, they come through to collect their tax money, and money exchanges hands. And then I guess later, after counting the money, Crow determines that this guy Pedro, he ended up shorting him. He was a couple $1,000s short. At least this was the reason that they used to justify his demise. Because you gotta look at it like this. If this guy Pedro was paying taxes, or if he was sending back a set percentage of his proceeds, and then later either Crow or one of his facilitators realizes that they were shorted by either 1,000 or 2,000, whatever it was, then you gotta wonder, why didn't they just call this guy back to resolve it? Call him back and tell him, hey homie, that bread that you shot, it was 1,000 or $2,000 short. Whatever it was, we need to make up and you need to square it up. I mean, that's common sense. That would have resolved it right there. You know, but based on the fact that he wasn't given the benefit of the doubt or a chance to pay that money back, only means one of two things. That they either believe that he purposely tried to pull a slick move by shortchanging them and burning them, or there was more involved and they wanted to take this guy out. So at this point now, because he's a couple $1,000s short, Crow looks at it like, man, I'm out $2,000. This is tax money that I have coming every month. This guy knows what he's supposed to pay. He purposely shorted me. He's got to go. He knows what he did. He tried to pull a scandalous move. So Crow, he puts a green light on him. So again, sometime on or around August 20th of 2017, an SUV was stolen from an Avis rental car agency located at a small airport called the John Wayne Airport. And this vehicle was stolen for the specific purpose of using it in the planned hit on Pedro. And this vehicle was stolen for the specific purpose of using it in the hit that was being planned on Pedro. Risky, Minor, and Buck start taking the final steps in carrying out the green light on Pedro. And obviously the first order of business was to get a gun. So the night before, Minor, he ends up picking up a .357 from one of his acquaintances, some guy that he had known for a long time, and this guy just so happened to be a gunsmith and a machinist. Buck also had another gun that he brought with him that was either an AK-47 or an SKS with a folding stock. So some of the other steps included driving out to the 800 block of East Culver Avenue in Orange, close to an area where Pedro lived, and also texting Pedro's girlfriend in an effort to lure him out of the house. So these three, they drive out to Orange and they pull over somewhere close to the 800 block of East Culver Avenue. So Risky was the one driving the SUV, Buck was riding shotgun, and Minor was in the back seat. Before I get into any more of the details of this story, let me just say this. Like most of these big federal operations, they'll usually have a designated surveillance team, and several of these agencies will all be working together. This case right here was also primarily built on wiretaps, intercepted text messages, and location pings from cell towers. Crow also had a contraband cell phone at the time, and some of his calls were intercepted as well. In fact, in one part of the indictment, it alleges that Crow and Dennis Ortiz, Woody from Compton 7-O's, had arranged to smuggle in contraband cell phones in the Salinas Valley State Prison, and that they were selling each phone from anywhere from $900 to $1,000 a piece. So after they get to this area by the 800 block of East Culver Avenue, the next thing that they do is Risky, he shoots a text message to Pedro's girl, whose name I believe is Diana, in an effort to get Pedro to come out of the house. And this was his usual method of contacting Pedro, to text his girl. In fact, Pedro's the one that set it up that way, to go through his girl to get at him. He probably was doing it like that because he was paranoid. So their plan for whacking Pedro was simple. They were gonna lure him out of the house, drive him somewhere discreet, then they were gonna shoot him and dump his body somewhere. And to get him to come out of the house, they came up with a contingency plan. They did this under the pretenses of leading Pedro to believe that they had a lucrative proposition lined up for him and that they wanted to talk more to him about it. So according to the text messages that investigators would later intercept, this is the exchange between Risky and Diana, Pedro's girl. It's a short message, but this was it verbatim. Hey D, let P know to get at me. I don't even know why Risky shot a text message. He had to have known that that message was going to come back to hurt him later. I mean, think about it. If they went out there with the intention of taking Pedro out, why would you want to call his phone or send them a text message saying anything. I mean, think about it. If they went out there with the intention of taking this guy out, that's one of the first things they're gonna do is get the phones and look at the last calls and the text messages. All you're doing by sending the text message is leaving a paper trail and identifying yourself as a suspect. The last one that sent a text message or the last one that he left with. You know, like I said earlier, the investigators, they would also get access at all the cell towers that all these phones pinged off of, all the phones that they had flagged in that area. And later on, when they did get that information, they didn't just discover that Risky's cell phone had pinged off that tower, but they also discovered that Minor and Buck's had pinged off that same cell tower as well, within a matter of seconds. So Pedro's girl, Diana, she obviously relays that information to Pedro, and he agrees to go out and meet Risky a few minutes later. Now, here's the other thing. In one of my recent stories, I told you guys that they say that the average person that leaves their house gets recorded on video cameras, surveillance cameras, cell phones, whatever kind of camera it is, they get recorded on video at least 70 times per day. So later, after this homicide would occur, after they found Pedro's body, they combed that entire neighborhood for video surveillance cameras, and eventually they ended up finding one. Apparently they found a bunch of inoperable cameras. Like I told you guys, 9 times out of 10, a lot of the cameras that they find, they either don't work or the footage is so grainy that they can't use them. So they're only interested in operable video cameras. And sure enough, when they reviewed the footage, they captured about 5 minutes of raw footage that showed a dark SUV with Risky, Minor, and Buck inside. So the last piece of critical evidence that they were able to find came from some of the text messages that were still on Diana's phone, Pedro's girlfriend. So the last text message that came in on Diana's phone from Risky came in about 10 minutes later after the first text. It simply said, "Here." It was Risky basically letting Pedro know that he had just pulled up to his house. So after leaving the house to go meet up with Risky, Pedro actually texted Diana about 10 minutes later, telling her that he was okay and that he was in a car with Buck, somebody that they both knew. You know, this was critical mistake number 2, 3, or 4, allowing Pedro to make a text message after he got in the car. You know, seriously, it might have seemed a little out of character if one of them would have stopped him and would have said, "Hey homie, there's no text messages and there's no phone calls while we're conducting business. That's just one of our policies." As much as it might have seemed out of character, it wouldn't have mattered. They still could have sold it and it would have been to their benefit. And from the way it sounded, Pedro was comfortable. He was around people he knew, and there was no reason for him to believe that he was in any kind of trouble. And from what I've been able to gather about this story, both Risky and Buck, they like this individual. They both knew him, they had done business with him before in the past, and they had history together. But this hit wasn't personal. This was just business, and they were just following orders. So at some point, Risky, he sees a spot, he pulls over on the side of the street in an area that's close to the 800 block of East Culver Avenue, and they get out the car. It was dark, it was quiet, and by then, their adrenaline was pumping. All 3 of them knew that it was about to go down. So after all 4 of them get out of the SUV without saying another word to him, they opened fire on him. And they left him laying there, drowning in a pool of his own blood. Now, fast forward a couple days later after they took Pedro out. I'm not sure how they stumbled across this information, but apparently Minor, he went back to this acquaintance, this friend of his that he knew, that was a machinist and a gunsmith. He goes back to this guy and he basically asks him if he can switch out the barrel on the 357. You know, I'm not sure how well Minor knew this guy or what type of friendship they had, but when he asked him that question, it had to have made this guy suspicious, because when you ask somebody a question like that, it only implies one of 2 things: that you have a body on that gun and you're trying to cover your tracks. You know, at that point, it was obvious that they were in full damage control and that they were doing everything that they possibly could to clean up anything that could potentially come back to hurt them later. You know, who knows how it got there, but the stolen SUV that Risky was driving that night turned up abandoned on the side of a dirt road in TJ. So in the end, the jurors ended up deliberating for 1 short day, and then they came back with guilty verdicts across the board on Risky, Minor, and Buck. So they ended up finding them guilty of murder in aid of racketeering, which basically carries all day. However, I'm not sure how much time these guys got, or if they've even been sentenced yet. Like I said earlier on in this story, Risky turned state evidence and started cooperating so that he could pass go, collect $200, and find his way back home. I'm not even sure how much time Woody from Compton got after being charged in this indictment either. So besides Crow and Woody, I think there was one other Mexican Mafia member that was charged in this indictment as well, an individual by the name of Robert Aguirre, who they called Rob. And from everything I've been able to gather, Crow, Woody, and Rob are the three that have been placed in charge of overseeing Orange County following the demise of Sana. So Rob was charged with the only other murder that was named in the indictment, and this stemmed from a green light that he put on an individual named Robert Rios. A lot of you probably seen the video all over the media of these guys coming up to this guy's house late at night, and they all got long guns, and they end up taking this guy out in his front yard. That's the individual that Rob allegedly put a green light on. That was Robert Rios. And from what I remember, that incident was carried out on October 24th, 2017, sometime around 2 a.m. And again, that whole incident was captured on a video surveillance camera that Rios actually placed in an area of his yard that went undetected. You know, I can't show you guys that video because of YouTube's policies. I'll get dinged. But I can show you still shots that were taken from that video. Right now, you should be looking at some of those pictures. But in the original video, it shows a hit squad that consisted of 3 individuals carrying long guns that approached the house. So they walk up to the front of Rios's house. One of them reaches over the fence and physically pulls up a latch that opens up the front gate. So with their guns drawn, they end up pulling this individual Rios out of his house. Shit, he was probably still in bed. I think he had basketball shorts on. They pull him out of his house and they make him sit down on the ground in his front yard. 2 of them end up stepping out of view so you can't see what they're doing. But the third one stands there with his gun pointed at Rios, and you can see that he's talking to him. So while all this was happening, at some point, Rios's fight or flight instincts kick in, and he makes a futile attempt at trying to get away by tackling this guy. So he ends up tackling this guy. He pushes him backwards so that both of them end up going over the fence. And that's probably when he tried to make a run for it. He was probably thinking, man, I'm about to die anyway. I might as well try to get away. But this ended up leading to him being gunned down, shot 7 times in the back, while he ran down the street wearing 1 chancla. When he tackled the one guy, the other 2 that stepped out of view must have heard it, and that's when they got him. So this indictment, it was full of high drama. It had all the elements that most of these big major indictments have. Besides the homicides, all the overt criminal activity, the extortion, the street taxes that they were collecting, the contraband smuggling operation that they had lined up in Salinas Valley State Prison, etc., etc. It was a slashing that took place on December 1st, 2017. It didn't even talk about the reasons why they slashed this individual. It was just somehow related to the case. So when the indictment was unsealed and they moved in and started making all the arrests, Mark Cooper, also known as Reckless, was the last individual that they were looking for, and for a short period of time, they considered him to be a fugitive. Eventually, they would end up making the arrest, but he was the last one that was picked up on that indictment. But unfortunately for Reckless, he apparently got himself in some kind of wreck, no pun intended, and he seemed to be in hot water himself. Because on New Year's Day in 2018, Crow and another one of his crew members that also got indicted, named Omar Mejia, who went by Rascal, used an app called Signal to discuss murking a future fellow co-defendant, Reckless. And let me just make it clear to anybody that might have any misconceptions about this. This app called Signal that they were using to communicate on is burnt out just like the rest of them. The idea is that by using one of these encrypted apps like Signal, WhatsApp, Hoover, Kik, Telegram, GroupMe, Snapchat, etc., that their conversations will be secure and undetected. But don't believe the hype. All these apps are burnt out. Law enforcement's already up on that game. Shit, law enforcement probably taps into some of these apps and already knows how to decipher the communication long before these apps are even offered to the consumers and put in the app store. Think about that. That's why they're always naming these apps in some of these federal racketeering indictments. So at the time Rascal and Crow were using this Signal app to discuss Reckless's fate, Rascal was housed in Calipatria State Prison, and I believe that Crow was housed in Salinas Valley State Prison. So why were they discussing Reckless's fate? Apparently Reckless was accused of authorizing a green light on another gang member that was suspected of causing a police raid on other members of the crew. true. The problem with moving forward with the green light is that it wasn't sanctioned or authorized by Crow. He basically did it without getting clearance, and that'll get you in trouble every time, especially when you're operating in a world with a lot of inflated egos. You got to run it up the chain and follow the pecking order, something that Reckless obviously should have known. So on January 5th, 2018, they ended up hitting Reckless, but he got lucky and he survived. And then, not long after they got him the first time, an individual by the name of Hollywood Mike and two other individuals got him again. And although he burned up 2 of his 9 lives and survived again, this time they hit him pretty bad. They hit him in the face, the neck, and the head. But again, he ended up surviving. So the picture that you should be looking at right now is one of the actual bangers that was used in this stabbing. You know, if I get any updates on how much time these guys got after being convicted in this indictment, I'll do an update and I'll let you guys know. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys like this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for also continuing to tap into the channel. With that being said, you guys enjoy the rest of your day and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.